Now this is rather like imagining a puddle waking up one morning. Now this is something that only people like me who science fiction writers are allowed to think of, puddles that wake up. But imagine just for a moment a puddle waking up in the morning. And go, oh. This is an interesting world I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly. This hole I'm in fits me very snugly indeed. In fact, it fits me so neatly, I can only imagine and suppose that it must have been made to have me in it. What other conclusion is the puddle going to come to? And of course, as the sun rises in the sky and the puddle actually begins to shrink a little bit, nevertheless, the puddle, secure in its knowledge that this hole was meant to have it in him, that has him in it, narrates to himself all sorts of reasons for the sun going up and what's happening to him, and completely fails to realize until the very, very last moment as the last drop evaporates that this world wasn't for him at all. He just happened along at that particular moment, and a moment later his moment has passed. From a puddle's point of view, that is very, very hard to see, and from our point of view, it is also very hard to see that we just happen to be the ones who've happened along at this moment. We have evolved into this world. The world does not belong to us. It was not made to have us here. Any of the things that happened to any of the previous inhabitants of this world could very easily happen to us. So we have a few problems of perspective here. Oh, I have a problem of time actually. I've got about a third of the way into what I was going to say. In which case I may actually sort of suspend the rest of what I was going to say for our discussion afterwards, so I hope everybody else will know that they're going to work anyway. Now let me just say a couple of brief things about ways in which we may have tried to correct this false perspective we have. Because it is a false perspective. I mean, we think of the lives we lead as being perfectly normal, ordinary lives. But consider this. We actually live in the bottom of a gravity well, under a thin envelope of gas, on a small speck of rock, which is spinning around its own axis and simultaneously orbiting around a nuclear fireball 90 million miles away. The fact that we think this is normal is only an indication of how skewed our outlook is. Now we have done a number of things over the period we've been here to try and correct this perspective. One of which is, and an awful lot of these have to do with sand, oddly enough. First thing, let's talk about the ages of sand. The first thing we learned to do with sand was make glass. And out of glass we made lenses, and out of lenses we made telescopes, and we turned telescopes on the heavens and had an almighty shock. Because we discovered that this world, this universe we lived in, didn't basically consist of just the Earth and a few little pretty spinning lights going around it. It was rather bigger than that. It was almost unimaginably bigger than that. It was so much bigger than that we can only begin to try and comprehend the degree by which our imagination is defeated by it, not actually try and imagine it. And not only that, but the universe appears to consist almost entirely of nothing. This is also quite a shock. But we discover, as we look at nothing, with a few little specks here and there, we begin to discover some of the fundamental forces of nature. We discover about gravity, we discover about electromagnetism, we discover about the way that light behaves, and so on. So we begin to isolate some of the fundamental forces. The next thing we do with sand and lenses is we make microscopes, and we look down into the microscopic world, the sort of solid world we find around ourselves. Very solid world. And as we look at it in any depth or any detail, we discover it too consists almost entirely of nothing. And even where there are particles, where you might find an electron turns out not to be actually an actual thing, an actual particle, but merely the probability that there might be one there at any given moment. Doesn't feel like that to me, but there you go. So Using the sort of second age of sand, we discover some of the fundamental particles of which the universe is composed. The next thing we learn to do with sand is we make silicon chips out of it, we make computers. And this marks a very, very fundamental change, because from the macroscopic universe to the microscopic universe, we now discover something about the organic universe, because we've discovered these fundamental principles, these fundamental forces and fundamental particles, we've discovered by essentially taking things apart to see how they work. That's been the way that science largely, glibly, in my phrase, has progressed. And a universe of fundamental particles and fundamental forces is actually very hard for us actually to understand how it works. And there's always been this huge dichotomy between what the scientist reveals in his lab, in the isolated and separate world of the lab, and the rich, chaotic hurly-burly of the world we find outside. And the computer is the thing that begins to put this in place, because the computer allows us to move from taking things apart to see how they work to putting things together to see how they work. And for the first time is enabled to see, well, let's think about how you would take apart a cat to see how it works. The first thing you've got on your hands, if you try and take apart a cat to see how it works, is a non-working cat.